All right. So good evening, everyone. Thanks again for joining us this beautiful Thursday night. You could be doing a lot of things, but you're here to talk about housing in Prince George's County, and we're excited to have you. My name is Kyle Reeder, and I am a advocate with Rise Prince George's. Rise Prince George's is a group of county residents and allies advocating for policies and practices that build shared, sustainable prosperity in Prince George's County by creating safe, walkable, inclusive, and transit-oriented communities. Our group works with members to educate, engage, and mobilize for policy agenda that reshapes policy and budget priorities to build on the county's assets, transit, established communities, and the kinds of anchor institutions which drive job creations and economic growth. If you're interested in learning more about RISE or joining us, we meet regularly every once a month and host a number of different programming, including the one we're doing this evening, to engage and educate our members so that they can make best decisions in Prince George's County. So this evening, we'll be talking about affordability in our housing market. Affordability. The title is called "Affordability as We Grow," and this is a discussion on how we're addressing affordability in our housing in Prince George's County as we grow and attract different investments and jobs. This discussion comes at a very pivotal time when prices are rising. The county is attracting more development and investment. A lot of folks are moving here, and a number of different council members are set to join the county council in 2023. And so today we'll be discussing a little bit about what the county has done in housing and specifically for affordable housing, what kind of still needs to be done, and what the future holds for Prince George's County. And this evening we'll have two panelists, Councilwoman Dannielle Glaros. She is a Prince George's County Council District 3 member. She was a former Associate Director for Smart Growth America, and also the former Deputy Chief of Staff for the Governor's Office of Smart Growth. We also have Director Aspasia Xypolia. She is the Director of the Prince George's County Housing and Community Development Group. She also served in a number of different roles at the DHCS and was a Senior Project Manager at Community Builders. The next voice you'll hear after this, after a little bit of logistics, will be Councilwoman Glaros as the director and the councilwoman go into their presentation. But just some quick logistic and house notes. After their presentation, we'll have a section for question and answers where you can. We're encouraging folks to add their questions into the chat. There'll also be an opportunity for folks to ask their questions out loud. But like I said, thank you guys for joining us this evening. And Cheryl, are you going to release the poll? We do have a poll.
Ready for the poll.
Yes, so we do have a poll question for you all. If you guys take a few moments just to answer it, just so that we can get a better idea of who's joining us and where you kind of stand when it comes to the housing issues. But again, my name is Kyle Reeder, and Councilwoman, I'm passing it over to you.
Let's give a few more minutes for people to answer the poll. We'll keep you here for a bit longer.
Okay, that works.
There's 4 questions in the poll.
Yes, 4 questions.
Where is the poll?
It should have popped up on your Zoom account. Well, yeah, on your Zoom.
Well, I joined a minute or two late, but and I'm not really smart enough for my smartphone, but it's not in the chat.
No, and it might be it might be tough from a smartphone.
Mr. Orleans, if you don't mind, maybe we can send the poll via email, Cheryl. Is that an option?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, because I'm hitting submit and it won't let me submit. It's not doing anything. It's just, it's like it's frozen.
It won't allow me to submit.
Right, it won't allow me to submit either.
If you answer all 4 questions, then the submit button darkens to allow you to submit.
You have to
Oh.
scroll
To
down.
answer all 4 questions.
I didn't
Thank
know you had to scroll down, sorry.
Okay, but the first question is, I mean, I don't live in Prince George's
Oh,
County,
wait,
so I
I
can't
say
answer the
don't
first
know.
question. So say I don't know.
Yeah, so you don't know.
All right. Okay. Well, nothing
Sorry.
special about that.
I should have said I don't live in Prince George's County. Sorry.
Not yet, at least.
All right, about 20 more seconds, you think?
I think that's good. And again, if you're having any issues with answering the poll questions, just drop a note in the chat and we'll make sure to try to get that to you via email. All right, Cheryl,
All right, I think we're there.
Okay.
So I'm going to end the poll here, but you can see actually, just to summarize, we have a good showing from District 3 and District 6. And some folks from some other places. A lot of response saying that we have there's too little availability of affordable housing in Prince George's County. No one thinks it's too much. A lot of concern around gentrification and displacement. You could also choose weak property values or high property taxes. Rents are too high in Prince George's. Generally, there's a lot of agreement. That's the case. Okay,
Yeah.
That's the end of the poll.
Awesome.
Interesting feedback.
All
All right,
right.
Councilwoman.
Okay. So thank you to the Coalition for Smarter Growth and RISE for having us here today. We're incredibly excited. The director and I have worked together over the last few years. So we also put together a joint presentation for all of you. So we're going to go through this and then open up for question and answer at the end. I'm sure there'll be a lot of great dialogue and conversation ahead of us. And I will just say also just a special thanks to the Coalition for Smarter Growth for their leadership over the years. It's been wonderful to work with the coalition as a council member here in Prince George's County. Next slide, please. Awesome. Now, can everyone see the slides? Let me just double check on that organizationally before we get any further. Everyone can see. Okay, great. So in general, between the two of us, we are going to cover a bit on the county's economic development platform and our affordable housing goals, a little bit on our housing opportunities for all work. And in fact, want to thank Mary Ann Dillon, and I think there's probably a few other members of that work group that are here with us tonight for all their work over the last 3 years. We just wrapped up that work product this earlier, I guess it was the end of spring this year. Talk a little bit about what we have been doing, because the landscape around affordable housing has changed quite a bit in Prince George's County over the last few years. There's definitely more to do, but we're in a very different place, I would say, than when I started working for the legislative branch 16 years ago, and definitely when I came on board as a council member 8 years ago. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned, and you might have even heard this announcement, back over a year ago, the county executive launched her economic development platform. And for the first time ever, there was in that platform goals associated with affordable housing. And you can see a little bit more of what those goals are. They're big picture goals. They were set to align with the Council of Governments, COG's work around affordable housing in the region. But it was the first time ever, once again, that housing, particularly affordable housing, was part of the economic development, community development conversation here in Prince George's County. Because of those goals, that actually helped us as part of the Housing Opportunities for All work group move forward in the last year to really deepen how those goals might be fulfilled here in Prince George's County. Next slide. Before even the county executive came on board, I've been really blessed to be with a county council that really understands the value of affordable housing. And so several years ago, under the leadership of Derek Leon Davis and my colleagues, I was vice chair at the time, we launched a partnership with Enterprise Community Partners to put together a consultant study taking a look at what a comprehensive housing strategy would look like for Prince George's County. This study came out now almost 4 years ago now, or maybe a little bit more like 3.5. In essence, it laid out a 10-year comprehensive strategy for Prince George's County to meet the housing needs of all of our residents. And it really built on data and set sort of expectations and guidelines about specific housing needs and tools that we could utilize better here in Prince George's County. After that report came out, we formed the Housing Opportunities for All work group. Many of you have participated in that work group. That work group met for 3 years, and I'll talk a little bit more about that work and a little bit more of the strategy next. Next slide. So there was 3 pieces to the comprehensive housing strategy goals. The first one was to make sure that we continue to support our existing residents, including our longtime residents, seniors, and residents at risk of displacement. We want to make sure that we continue to attract new residents, including millennials, families, employers, and as well as developers to our community to build new housing. And then we want to also maximize our strategic investments, right, at our transit-oriented locations along the Purple Line corridor, where we know we will have new Purple Line stops, and at other locations to ensure that affordable housing and additional housing is part of the mix. Next slide. So the comprehensive housing strategy did look at a variety of different pieces, and I won't go through this slide too much, but you can imagine that it took a look at the housing diversity we had in Prince George's County. In general, I would emphasize we have tended not to have the diversity of housing types you see in other jurisdictions. We are heavily single-family detached homes and large multifamily buildings. And that is one piece that comes up a lot in our conversation around how do we provide additional housing options within Prince George's County. And the other thing I'll make a note about also is the quality and conditions. Much of our affordable housing here in Prince George's County was built in the 70s and 80s. It is an older housing stock. And that also has its challenges in terms of upkeep, in terms of the quality of housing that has been providing to our residents who are most in need here in Prince George's County. You can also see that some other items that the report looked at was demographic changes, the changing market conditions that might be happening, as well as affordability challenges. How affordable is a unit to someone with a typical household income in Prince George's County? Next slide.
Sorry,
Oops, go back. No, that's okay.
a little jumpy. Is that it?
Okay. I believe so. If not,
Ah.
yes, that's okay.
I don't know why it's.
Next slide. Nope.
The view is better, but the control is less.
Okay, there you go.
Ah.
It's all right.
All right, I'm gonna get out of. Hold on.
Oops. There you go.
Okay, finally. Okay,
Okay.
so,
great.
all right, there it is.
Slide 7.
Sorry.
Next slide.
Next slide. Oh, okay.
Perfect. So some data, and some of you actually, some of the data I'm going to go through is very aligned with some of what you filled out in the earlier poll that was asked by Rise. So in terms of housing conditions and affordability, you can see here a little bit in terms of some of the measurements that were looked at, as well as also cost burden for households in terms of how much of a percentage of those housing costs are being borne by that family, right? So what portion of their household budget can they really afford towards housing? Next slide. Changing rents. So one thing that we're paying a lot of close attention to is what is happening in the rental market. While Prince George's County has historically been a little bit lower than the DC area, we are rapidly catching up. And in fact, this is still looking at 2019 data. If we were to pull the most recent data, you would see that actually we are just barely behind the region in terms of costs, right? So we are really close to the costs that you might experience in DC or Anne Arundel County. And we've seen actually quite a bit of median rent increases. And I know from hearing from my residents in the community this year alone, there's definitely rent increases that we are seeing happening in the marketplace, especially this year as well. Next slide. So the report itself was set up in a few different ways. And I share this because I think it's helpful oftentimes is if you ever look at the analysis we've done or the recommendations so far that the work groups worked on, we look at two different types of strategies. So sometimes we're looking at cross-cutting strategies. These are ones that really sort of help enhance our policies and incentives. And they are oftentimes ones that sort of cover multiple different categories across the report. And we also have some very specific targeted strategies that are based on needs and market conditions. Next slide. So what did we do over those 3 years? So as I mentioned, the report was put together. All of you probably know me well. I don't like reports to sit on the shelf, right? Why do a report otherwise? So we're all about implementation. So the last 3 years, this work group, which represents a diverse group of partners from industry to affordable housing advocates. So for instance, HIP, Housing Initiative Partnership, Marianne Dillon's on this call today, but also Ashanti Martinez from Casa de Maryland was part of this group, but we also had AOBA as part of it. And we had MBIA, the Maryland Builders Association, as part of this as well. So we had both industry and affordable housing advocates, as well as county agencies around the table to figure out how can we work together to ensure that we are lifting up this comprehensive housing strategy. So over those 3 years, every year we put together a report. The committee, in essence, sort of helped to chart that pathway forward. And there's a lot of things that I can report. There's so much more we still need to be done, but there are some really, I think, exciting highlights from it. One is the fact that we met a lot and dialogued a lot. And I stress that because I think one of the most important things is building language around this work around affordable housing and growing our housing portfolio here in Prince George's County, but also growing an advocacy group that is committed to figuring out how do we move forward these solutions to provide even more housing options here in Prince George's County. Over that course of 3 years, we tackled several actions within that report. And once again, those were prioritized based on the core working group. Some of the accomplishments, and the director will talk about more of these in the near future, is right of first refusal. For years, we've had a tool in our toolbox called right of first refusal, but it was not operating, which meant that the county did not have the opportunity to weigh in, and perhaps as properties, as apartment buildings were being sold and transacted, we didn't have the right process in place, frankly, or the funding in place to really be able to exercise our right to bring in additional partner to ensure that that housing stays as affordable housing in the future. And the director will talk about more about how that's operating and already how it's starting to deliver units here in Prince George's County in affordable housing. We also did not have a dedicated funding source. And so today, we now in Prince George's County for the first time ever have a dedicated funding source. It's actually funded through our one of the fees that's done when our recordation tax, which is done when you transact a house, when you purchase a house here in Prince George's County. So a portion of that is now permanently dedicated to a growing fund. And the director will talk more and more about how she's able to leverage that to drive even more projects here in Prince George's County around affordable housing. I really have to thank her, but also thank the county executive and my colleagues for adamantly supporting that and now being able to move forward in such a way. We've also invested in community navigators. One of the key things, if we've learned anything from COVID, and we've learned a lot, right? There's a lot of lessons to take, is that there's a lot of bureaucracy in what we ask people to do, right? So people have to fill out a lot of paperwork to be able to access sometimes the benefits that they need, or be able to apply for programs that they need. They need assistance on the ground to help them navigate that process. So investment in community navigators to really help families and individuals be able to connect to the programs that are out there to support them is also an investment priority. Next slide. So here's a few things that I wanted to draw your attention to, in part because they're the most recent recommendations. I can definitely talk about some of the other things we've done. I'm sure they'll come up with questions at some point in time, but I draw your attention to these for a few different reasons. So one of the final recommendations of the work group, remember it's a work group, so that's not a permanent entity, was to create a housing policy and implementation advisory board. And in fact, this legislation was just presented on the county council's agenda the other day. It is expected to be in Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, I believe on September 15th. We will permanently, hopefully, if this passes, we will be able to formally have a policy and implementation advisory board in it with members that would be appointed by the county council and the county executive. Next slide. And then the second piece I will mention, in part because I think this is one that Aspasia and I especially believe that this is probably one of the most important things that needs to be a focus here in Prince George's County over the next year. And I'm sad to say I won't be here to help participate in it the way I would like to, since I'm coming off the council, but I know my new colleagues coming on will be very committed to this, which is that we really need to lift in Prince George's County the type of landlord and tenant supports that might be existing in other locations. That includes such recommendations that came out of the work group, including an Office of Tenant Rights, which we need to lift here in Prince George's County, as well as lifting a tenant landlord commission. And this was a recommendation that came out of the work group, in part because we do need a place really to help educate tenants and landlords, build relationships, but also address mediation and arbitration that sometimes happens and resolve tenant and landlord disputes. So I put those sort of in the forefront as you all are thinking about things that you think of as more that we need to be doing in Prince George's County. With that, I'm going to transition the next set of slides to our amazing director over at the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Great. Thank you very much. And I will do a little sound check. Can you all hear me?
Perfect.
Perfect. And can you all understand me?
I can.
Great. So Councilmember Glaros and I have been in very many meetings and presentations together. So if at any point there is any confusion, raise your hands. And she has been great in translating Gringlish to English. So we look forward and thank you all very much. I think it's a beautiful Thursday afternoon. So if you are here right now, it means you really, really care. And we look forward to the discussion. So I'll give you a little more information and then I would love to take questions. So as Councilmember Glaros spoke earlier, in addition to the HOFA work that has happened the last 3 years, which is very exciting, our county executive also set explicit housing goals in the summer of 2021. And for that, for us, this becomes our North Star. We have something to work towards and to align our tools and to align our resources. And so what those goals say is that by 2030, we need to produce 26,000 new homes in the county. And 75% of those will be committed to some level of affordability. And we are emphasizing on the transitory and the development because of all the infrastructure investments happening in the county. And also, as Councilmember Glaros said, we need to emphasize on diversifying the kind of housing we have in the county. We do have a lot of single family homes. We have less multifamily construction. So there is a emphasis on also supporting affordable multifamily construction. And one thing I forgot to put on the slide is the explicit goal of preservation, to preserve 6,000 units by 2030. 30. Next slide, please. So there was a little bit of a question on the chat about what affordable means. So generally speaking, if you are paying more than 30% of your income towards your housing costs, and that doesn't include just your rent and your mortgage, it includes also your utilities, then you are cost burdened. If you are paying more than 50%, you are severely cost burdened. So to give you an example, in the county, for a person that makes around what we call 60% of area median income, if you're a person of one, that is 59,000, a little less than 60,000, right? And if it's a household of two, so it can be a mother and a kid or a couple, then you make around 68,000. So that's the 60% of area median income. So if that is how much you make, in order to not be cost burdened, if you live in a one unit, you should not be paying, including your utilities, more than 1,600 a month. If you are living in a two-bedroom, including your utilities, you should not be paying more than 1,900 a month. Now, there are lower incomes too, and we know a lot of people are at the 30% of area median income. So 30% of area median income means that if you are a household of one, so it's just you make around $29,000. And in that case, if you are living in a one bedroom unit, you should not be paying more than $800 towards your utilities and cost. So I wanted to bring this up just to frame a little bit the discussion. The reason that the affordability goals were left at a very high level at 120% was because we are having some homeownership programs that go up that high, and we want to support those as well. But we really see that most people are cost burdened. Most people who are cost burdened make around 50% of area median income and below. And this is where we are targeting most of our resources. So I will look at the questions you are putting afterwards, but I wanted to clarify that. So Councilmember Glaros also talked about this incredibly important win that the council and the administration had around creating a housing investment trust fund, which pretty much says that every year moving forward, starting in July 1st of 2022, we will set aside the minimum of 20% of our recordation taxes or $10 million. So it can be higher, but it will never be lower than $10 million towards funding this housing investment trust fund. And that allows us to leverage that money with private money, with state money, and to create affordable housing. The department also has other resources that are coming our way from the federal government, such as the home money, but this is much less. It's less than $3 million a year. It's still great money. We're still utilizing them. But having that local, also predictable source is very important. We are also utilizing tools such as payment in lieu of taxes. We are providing tax abatement for the creation and preservation of affordable housing units. And now that we do have this housing investment trust fund, the bigger thing that has happened for us is it has created predictability and the ability to plan and to leverage. So last year, at the end of last year, was the first time we issued actually an offer, a notice of funding availability, and told nonprofit, for-profit, or mission-driven developers to submit a proposal to us and request our money, but also show us what are they going to produce with that, and then how are they going to leverage that money with state resources, with private resources. And out of that NOFA, we have been able to start planning for 900 new affordable housing units in the county. And we are getting ready to issue our second NOFA before the end of this year. And next slide, please. So this is a little bit of a snapshot of what has been happening. We just recently completed a few projects that are delivering 444 affordable units. We have another 473 affordable units under construction. And then within the next 12 months, we talked about the pipeline, we're going to be able to deliver 1,200 new affordable units. So at the end of the day, that is a lot of activity and a lot of new affordable units coming online. And 9 of these projects are located in TOD and are bringing forward more than 1,800 new affordable units. And next slide, please. And now we're going to touch on preservation. And before we talk a little more about it, I want to clarify two things about preservation. There is a preservation of existing committed affordable housing. That means that many, many years ago, like we are doing right now, bringing forward new affordable units, the state, the federal government, the county worked together and created some affordable housing units in the county. When you create affordable housing, you also record what we call affordability covenant. So that new affordable unit comes with a period of time within which it has to remain affordable. Those affordability covenants expire at a point. It could be 40 years down the road, 30 years down the road, whatever that moment is from the moment the unit was built. So it is important that we monitor our existing affordable housing stock, even if it has been produced by just state and HUD resources. It's still located in the county. We still need to understand if it is going to expire and what role we can play to ensure that there is a continuation of that affordability period. And then what we have then there is the other concept of the naturally occurring affordable housing in the county. That means that there are properties that today are affordable because their rents are not very high, but they're not committed. So as the market changes and as rents increase, something that is affordable today, because it's not committed affordable, will not be affordable next year or the year after. And that is what we call the naturally occurring affordable housing supply, which is a rapidly disappearing asset in the county. And it has been all over the region and nationally too. And Councilmember Glaros spoke about some trends earlier. We do see, based on specific market studies that come our way, that really rents are escalating at a higher level. And there are some sub-markets where they're escalating at 12%, 13% a year, because it is really a very hot market in the region and nationally. So we can go to the next slide. Yes, we can go to the next slide. So as it relates, so we are dealing with those two preservation efforts differently. The first thing we did was we worked internally in the department the last year to create a affordable housing inventory. So if you go to our website, you can see a link that takes you to all properties in the county that are currently committed affordable housing. And we are monitoring to see if and when any of those will be expiring. And the next slide, please. And then we also have a right of first refusal program that Councilmember Glaros talked about. That deals mostly with the naturally affordable occurring housing. It's called NOAA. So what happens, how does the program work? So every time there is a transaction of a multifamily property in the county, and any property that is over 20 units, we, the department, we get notified. We look at the existing property and we see what are the current trends. Where is the property located? Is it located around TOD areas? Is it located in areas that we know there are market pressures? And if it does, we make a quick yes or no decision based on how it scores, based on different factors, and we have the ability to exercise our right of first refusal, which means it can mean two different things. One means that if the existing, the new buyer doesn't want to institute any affordability, we put it out there we issue an RFP to a list of pre-qualified mission-driven for-profit and non-profit developers to see if they want to purchase it for the exact same price that it was going to be sold. But in exchange, they're going to have to institute affordability, long-term affordability for at least 15 years. And we set up that affordability based on what we know, what we see on the rent roll, the existing rents to be. Then there is another way that the right of first refusal program works. And now that people are learning about the program more, they are actually coming our way. The new buyer comes our way and says, can I get an exception to the right of first refusal process by agreeing upfront on establishing affordability in this sale? And so we have success stories done both ways, either by issuing an RFP. That's how our Hamilton Manor was our first actually transaction through an RFP. That's how it happened. And most recently, we have done a lot of deals through the exception process. And next slide, please. So what has happened today? The first time we actually closed on a right of first refusal deal, I believe, was in March of 2021. And since then, we have been able to secure affordability in over 1,200 units in the county through this program. What we also learned the very hard way is that this is a very hard program to actually implement meaningfully. Because what happens is, if there is a transaction, the price of the property is set based on the fact that people know the rents will skyrocket, or at least will increase. And so if we are coming in and saying, no, we need to institute affordability, then that creates a financial challenge for the buyer. So we realized very quickly that we have to create our own tools and resources to be able to close that gap. And we were very, very fortunate that the county set up $15 million from the county's ARP money to our department, so we can create the county's right of first refusal preservation fund. And the state of Maryland actually came through and leveraged this $15 million with another $10 million. So we went from having nothing to having $25 million of resources that we can use towards this preservation effort. We're excited. We're going to close on our first loan this fall. So that is something that is very, very impactful. We also expanded the roster of the pre-qualified nonprofit and for-profit developers who are working with us. And also there was an effort, there was a state level legislative change that happened in 2021 that allows us to also put a pilot, a payment in lieu of taxes, in right of first refusal deals, because we have to make this, we have to make financially the delta between the price that is sold, assuming the rents will grow, and the price that is sold, which is the same, stabilizing rents. And when the department steps in and provides our resources in these deals, we look at two things. We look at the long-term affordability and non-displacement, and also how we're going to address maintenance and capital improvements in these properties, because sometimes rents are lower because properties haven't necessarily received the level of investment. And so this is what we are typically looking at. So I saw a question, the ways that the properties are kept affordable is we are recording covenants. So there in the land records, if a property has been acquired through the right of first refusal program, it has recorded covenants, and now it is like any other affordable housing property in the nation. That's how we monitor then with inspections annually what is going on.
Aspasia, do you want to share those typical ranges of the covenants? I know they vary because there's a few different ways we've handled it, but what's the typical affordability length of time that those buildings will be dedicated affordable?
It's a minimum of 15 years. We haven't done one that is more than 20 so far because those are existing assets, and we will address at the very last slide what limitations that presents. And next slide, please. I also want to say about the right of first refusal program that we felt strongly about initiating this parallel to the new production, because preserving NOAA properties is only a moment in time. If the rents escalate, there is nothing to preserve anymore. So we do have deals that come our way where the rents have already been over 80% of area median income. And at that point, because those are occupied properties, there is no really meaningful way for us to step in.
And Aspasia, there's one other question that popped in about right of first refusal, which I think is sort of worth pausing just a little longer on. It's a question about the affordability. So can you describe with the different projects we've been doing under right of first refusal, what's the range in terms of affordability that's being negotiated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I'm going to step up back and explain a little bit the difference between new construction and preservation. Just to address that. So when you do a new construction project, early on you say, I'm going to create this many units at 60%, this many at 50, this many at 30, right? And then you deliver the building and you lease it up based on these requirements. When we're doing preservation of a NOAA property, this is an occupied property. And when you live in a market rate occupied property, which this is what it is for all purposes, nobody knows your income. You don't have to report it to anybody, right? So we really don't know the income of the existing residents. But what we do know is how much rent they pay. So we use the rent rolls of each property as a proxy to create meaningful affordability. So if a property comes our way and we see that all rents are about 60% of area median income, then this will be our target for limiting, for establishing affordability. We did have some properties that came our way and they were at 80%, they had some units at 70%. So we looked at where the existing rents are, and that's how we create the affordability benchmarks for these properties. Now, when also the properties are closer to TOD areas, we look at making more units. Most recently, at around 75% of the total units are established as affordability. When the properties are farther away from market pressures, we go down to 50%. So there is a science to how much we push, which also translates to how many resources we have to put forward. But we see mostly at 60% of AMI the rents in these properties that are coming our way. So those are really like workforce established properties where we want to make sure that people who live and work in Prince George's County and live there will not be displaced.
And I would just add on the right of first refusal, one of the things, because I know this is coming up with the discussions we're having along the purple line, is how different Montgomery is to Prince George's. But one of the big differences is we don't have as much dedicated affordable housing as Montgomery County. We're actually playing catch up, right? We've had a lot of naturally occurring. So programs like right of first refusal are absolutely critical, specifically right now, in really sort of stemming the tide around future displacement that could be happening in areas where we're seeing economic growth happening in our communities and around Prince George's County. And the good news about right of first refusal is we've exercised that in a few different locations across the county. So it's not just been exercised up here in the northern part, but some other places as well. But it's every transaction comes across the desk of DHCD to see if that is a property we want to be involved in. And some of that does depend on if there's money involved and if there's interest in being involved from a property owner out there.
That's right. And so also there is a lot of work that we still have to do. So this last closing slide is for things that we are initiating now or have been initiated, but are by no means finished or concluded. So we have to accelerate the housing production of committed affordable units. I also neglected to say that in addition to the $10 million this year that the county is putting towards our housing investment trust fund, the state of Maryland made another $10 million commitment to leverage that money. And so that is sometimes when there is energy and when there is vision and when constituents really understand and advocate for issues, then we really see how our other partners, our other public partners are stepping in on the table to leverage their resources. But we will work on accelerating housing production, and also we're working on developing a dashboard that we're going to put on our website that measures all of those things. So you don't have to wait for me to come to a presentation. You can go in our website and see this many units under production, this many units are going to be completed, and this is what in the pipeline. So within the next year, we're going to have that stuff in our website. We also know that we have to create more units that are at lower price points. This 60% of area median income, we know it works. We know people will list it up. We know it's of a great need, but we need to produce 50, 40, and 30% of AMI units. And that is hard financially because for everybody who has touched the affordable housing landscape a little bit knows that in order to produce the extremely low income units, you need some level of operating support that historically has come from the federal government. And because that is very scarce, producing extremely low income units nationally is a very, very hard proposition. But we are looking at ways of being able to produce units at the lowest levels, especially through our home ARP money, a one-time infusion of capital coming from the federal government and some other ways. But that is front of center on our thinking, knowing that there are limitations in the operating subsidy on that. We're also looking at doing more on affordable home ownership. We do have a down payment assistance program, but we know that there is not enough supply of affordable home ownership. So we're going to be working on creating programs that will help produce more affordable home ownership. And then we need to worry about what happens in 15 to 17 years when these NOAA properties that we are committing today are going to come up for redevelopment. So what happens at that point and what happens at the redevelopment of all NOAA properties in the county when they are around TOD stations and areas that we know that rents will be escalating. So we're in the process right now of preparing an RFP to solicit an economist, policymaker to come and help us understand and think through how we can enhance our existing right of first refusal program or create another program that deals with redevelopment. And Councilmember Glaros touched on that earlier. Tenant landlord rights and relationships there is a gap in the county on that, and we've seen it come at the forefront during the pandemic crisis and by administering our ERAP program. There is a lot of work we need to be doing collectively on that. And the last thing I will say is that there was an inclusionary zoning study that was done a couple of years ago. And at the time it was determined that that was not a good tool for the county yet. But as economics change, we will be revisiting that policy proposition to see when the time is right and how it can be structured to be effective in the county.
And Aspasia, it strikes me as we go to questions and maybe back to Kyle or Cheryl or the audience here. I think one thing that I would also put on is when we first originally did our Housing Opportunities for All report, and Enterprise as our consultant put that together, they sort of said we ultimately in Prince George's County need to be doing affordable housing where we have like a fund or funding sources almost at the $80 million level. And so I say that for a few reasons, because if you've heard Aspasia talk the last few minutes, you've heard if you started counting in your head, 10 million that we put in from the Housing Investment Trust Fund that was matched by a 10 million from the state. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So that's up to 20 million. Mm-hmm. If you add in the ARP money the county dedicated, how much was that, Aspasia?
15.
That was another 15.
One-time federal money.
Which was federal money, and it's sort of one-time money, right? Because it will eventually expire on us. And then we also have some additional money from the state in addition to that. How much was that?
Another 10 million. They leveraged our 15 with 10.
Another 10 million. So that got us up to about $55 million. So I sort of share that with everyone on this because part of the story I think that's really important for folks to take away is making sure that we can find those dollars to continue to do this investment that we're starting to experience and to continue to do this looking ahead that we need to do in these other areas, particularly in the 50% and 40% and 30% range. It needs even more dollars, and we have to be able to sustain the money that we already have in this space as well. So I just want to make sure that folks think about that and keep that in mind. For perspective's sake, when I started as a council member here in Prince George's County, the only money we had in this space in terms of affordable housing was money that was coming through our CDBG, our Community Development Block Grant Program, and occasionally money from the state. So we are in a different space than we were ever before 8 years ago, but we still need to continue to develop in this space. And there's a lot more ahead in what we need to be doing around affordable housing. So with that, I think we'll turn it back to Cheryl and Kyle and other questions coming in from the audience as well.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Councilwoman and Director, for coming and again, sharing this very extensive presentation. I think there's a lot of really good information. I did have a quick question. I wanted to start with Councilwoman Glaros. As you kind of talked about a little earlier, the market is starting to command a lot more housing around our transit hubs. And we know that transit is very important to getting people to jobs and amenities that make the quality of life in our communities important. You serve as part of the steering committee for the Purple Line Corridor Coalition. And one of their goals in that was to do some preservation of housing along the Purple Line Corridor. Can you talk a little bit more about just your experience in that space and talk specifically about the Housing Accelerator Action Team and some of the work they've been doing in that?
Sure. So I think we actually have some members of that Housing Action Team on here. So there's been really a team effort. So a few quick just nuggets I'll share with folks. So we have a organization that's very focused on housing affordability as one of sort of several pillars that we want to focus in on as the purple line comes in, right? We want to make sure that as that investment's happening, the community around it benefits from it and we minimize displacement from it. So we have about 17,000 affordable housing units across Montgomery and Prince George's County that are within a mile of the purple line station. And so our goal of PLCC is zero net loss. So that means that 17,000 units that are here today as affordability will be here in the future as the purple line is built out and the purple line comes on board. That doesn't necessarily mean that the same unit, right? Some of that will be preservation. Some of that might be a tear down of a garden style apartment to build a brand new, larger affordable housing product. But either way, it would be 17,000. There's a lot of work that group's doing, very much aligned with some of what you heard the director do right now. I think the most key thing is generating opportunities along that corridor for additional affordable housing investment and working with such partners to bring in other financial resources to make these transactions happen around the corridor. We're also incredibly excited to have the Amazon Housing Equity Fund involved in several projects along the Purple Line corridor. You may or may not know, but we have about 500 plus units between College Park Metro and at the New Carrollton Metro, literally within steps of the entrance for both of those. That will be affordability for 99 years is in essence sort of the span on the Amazon housing equity. So that means as incomes might rise around or as prices of rents might rise around, those properties right at the Metro will have affordability at them. And we're continuing to build more in along that whole corridor as well. So that's a little bit of a snapshot. There's so much more. We could do a whole presentation on all the Purple Line PLCC and HAT work.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. And another follow-up question is, what do you think are some of the primary barriers? At the top of your presentation, you talked about how the county is very heavily, our lack of diversity in our housing stock. Like I said, we're heavy single family, a lot of it is older. But what do you think are some of the biggest barriers to producing more diversity in our housing in the county? And I know we're pushing to like new transit-oriented development, but what from your perspective, what are some of those barriers to getting those more multifamily housing?
Great question. So I think I would say one barrier, which I think is less of a barrier today, is that for a really long time, Prince George's County didn't really talk much about affordable housing, right? We just assumed it was naturally affording here in Prince George's County. We didn't really have a strategy. We didn't have a comprehensive strategy. We definitely didn't have a county executive who was putting affordability and affordable housing as part of her platform, which is a very big deal, or a council that was doing that. I say that a lot because I actually have more deals transacting around affordable housing today in District 3 than I've ever seen in 16 years. And part of it is because people want to be where there's momentum, where there's excitement around growing affordable housing, but also where there's incentives and dollars at the table to make it happen. And there's a team of people there. So I say that first and foremost, because I think that's really important. I have a project, Bob Catlin's on this phone, so he knows it well, up on Baltimore Avenue, which will take down a few hotels that have not been very great hotels, very budget style hotels, but build back in 60 and 50% AMI housing and actually also have host the College Park Meals and Wheels in the first floor retail. So there, like that project, we would have never seen 15 years ago, or frankly, even 5 years ago. I think this momentum here in the county is really important. And so I just urge the next council to continue to make sure that affordable housing is really part of this dialogue. I think the second thing is dollars do matter in this space, and being able to leverage money really matters. At the end of the day, there is gaps with doing affordable housing, particularly the next phase, which I think you've heard us say a lot, The first phase was really starting to get more of our tools operating and functioning, but now we need to dig deeper into providing for those with the even least means available, right? At that 40% or 30% or 50% AMI, that needs more dollars at the table. So making sure that we have that funding source is absolutely critical for continuing to provide affordable housing and frankly, to be able to grow that housing stock as well.
Thank you. Director, this one is for you. I'm pulling from the chat. This comes from Sophie in reference to the right of first refusal program. And what are the ways to keep properties acquired under this program affordable? I think you talked about it a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about what your agency is doing and
So
how you guys implement that?
yeah, when there is a property that is being purchased under the right of first refusal program, at the moment of the transaction, we also record affordability covenants. That's how exactly affordable housing works all over the country. So there is an agreement done that says that the income, the rents and the incomes will stay at these levels. And then we, DHED, are implementing a monitoring process, which is something the state of Maryland does for all the properties they are also sponsoring. That monitors annually if the developer is adhering to those covenants. So there is actually a lot of tooth to that. It's not just a handshake.
Thank you. And then Sheila Bryant has a question, and I think we're going to unmute Sheila. Or Sheila, if you can unmute yourself.
I think I am.
Okay, cool, awesome. Did you want to share your question?
Yes, I have a couple of questions, and I'll make them kind of brief. So I want you to talk briefly more about who the pre-qualified nonprofit developers are, because for specialty types of housing, like for returning citizens who don't ordinarily get a bite at the affordable housing apple, because they're returning citizens, there is a huge void in Prince George's County for them, and for things like you were talking about hotels, for a halfway house or some kind of resources for returning citizens. Who are those people, and how do we, as nonprofits, I work with Progressive Maryland Returning Citizens Task Force, and we're trying to help fill the void. It's been difficult, and I just want to start with talking to the developers to see if they're interested in doing that. What kind of resources are there from the county? So that's one question. And finally, how is it that the outreach will occur for these community navigators? Because I mean, that is huge. I also am a volunteer attorney with Community Legal Services at Rent Court. And it's tragic how many people are being displaced because the rents on the apartments that they've fallen behind due to COVID or for whatever reason. How do they get access to those resources that you're talking about to find affordability? I mean, I know that there's human services that offer some support. But when those monies dry up, as well as the COVID funds dry up, how are you going to let people know that there are community navigators? What is the plan for that?
So I saw Marianne raising her hand. Do you want to speak on the community navigators, and then I'll take the other questions?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that, because we were able to hire 2 community navigators thanks to the money from the county. It has been a godsend for us as an organization in terms of getting the word out. And I can tell you just the amount of traffic that I see to our website, the number of queries I get at our general information email box. Not a day goes by that I don't have some other query that I wouldn't otherwise be seeing. So the community navigators have been really great. They show up 1 day a week at the courts to go and intercept people who are facing eviction and make sure that we can link them for services and kind of circumvent that before the eviction occurs. And we're doing that both in Montgomery and in Prince George's County, both counties. That's really just an incredible service. And I just applaud our people who are doing this, who are you know, and they get the word out by going to, you know, to farmers markets, to community festivals, to food giveaways, anytime that there's any kind of thing for, you know, emergency assistance for people, they will be there to get the word out. So it's really important. The money.
Can you
is
put
gonna
that
dry up.
information? Could you put that in the chat? Can you put that in the chat, how one reaches them? Because I'm at court at least twice a week and I have not seen those people.
Okay, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
surprised. I'll put that in, Sheila.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
So to your question about returning citizens, first of all, I put on the chat our website, the link of our page for the right of first refusal. You can see a lot of information there. And also you can see list of pre-qualified developers. Now, these are not developers, they're pre-qualified for the right of first refusal program, right? So every time there is a transaction and we issue an RFP, this is who gets an opportunity to purchase the property in exchange for establishing affordability. So as it relates to returning citizens, there was a task force in the county and to address all kinds of issues around returning citizens, and of course housing is one of them. And we do have to create, so our Department of Social Services is on the front lines of this, because people re-entering the community also sometimes have no income, right? So there are different stages of what you may need. You may need to access, again, a job. You may need workforce programs. You may need the social services support. And as it relates to the things we can do, which is producing and preserving affordable housing, we do need to produce more of it for all people. And then there will be more available supply for returning citizens as well. If we are talking with a nonprofit developers group that has done similar projects in other states, and they are interested in creating returning citizens apartments in the county, DHED stands ready to support these efforts. We really need mission-driven developers who will bring them forward. But you're absolutely right to say that there is a lack of it. I haven't heard any jurisdiction saying they have enough of it or they have learned how to do it. It's a very difficult undertaking. But
I just want to add that despite, even if they have a job, it's very difficult to get property managers to agree to rent to somebody who has a rental history that's been, you know, vacant for those many years. So that's the other problem. Even with ban the box or don't ask, people still see it. So I mean, addressing that, yeah.
So that's why we're saying we're working with a nonprofit developer, because if we put our money, we can control what you can and cannot ask for upon lease up. If there are market rate properties where we don't participate, or if other lenders participate that have different requirements that provide higher level of funding, there is very little we as a department can do. Ultimately, I think that is something that I think there was a discussion at the state level at the point talking about returning citizens under the fair housing umbrella. And I think it requires a larger, broader conversation.
I agree. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheila, for your question. Pull another one from the chat from Matthew Sanchez. Larger real estate asset ownership groups continue to buy suburban affordable, naturally and income protected properties at historically high valuations. As a result, it has become difficult to purchase and execute 4% LIHTC rehabilitation projects and be competitive in today's market compared to national institutions. What are your thoughts on this challenge facing affordable housing?
So this is true. This is absolutely right. And I see Miriam nodding. There are market forces that are very strong, and we cannot control the global market. We see foreign investment coming to purchase properties in the county, right? So this is absolutely true. What we can say is that there is this exception on the right of first refusal code. So if you are a developer looking to purchase an affordable a property in the county that is either already committed and you want to continue having it as committed, or that is not currently committed but you want to have it as committed, you will still go through all these market processes, all these bidding processes. That there is nothing that we can do as DHCD, but what we can do is you can come our way and say, okay, this is the transaction I'm looking at, and how can we work through an exception of the program, which means, you know, we're going to establish affordability, and we as a department will come in and also provide some resources. So it's complicated and it's messy.
Yeah,
And
and I might, I was just going to add to this one, just because this has been a conversation with PLCC. In fact, yesterday was a big conversation about policy goals that we might want to pursue at the state level. I think one of the things we need to think about, because the 4% and 9% credits are really done at the state level, is thinking a little bit more about how much money is out there from the state in that space, but also what the expectations are of the state, of the entities that they're transacting with, and how are we valuing sort of the point system that gets people access to this 4% and 9% credits. I know, at least for us along the purple line, we would like them to prioritize the purple line, for instance, in some of these tax credit programs, because access to these tax credit programs is so competitive that even after a project goes through development review, it may not get to actual construction for years upon years because the financing so that they can move forward is just not in place yet. And we got to figure out how to speed that process.
Thank you for that. So I have another question. This one wasn't in the chat, but it came from Bernard. What economic, Bernard Holloway, what economic and political pressures do you believe prevent the county from creating an inclusionary zoning policy where developers are required to either build new affordable housing themselves at high potential TOD sites or contribute to public funds to support efforts to construct more housing?
Sure. So maybe Aspasia and I will take this one on. I'll just give you guys a little bit of the historic backdrop on this one. The first year that the Housing Opportunities for All work group was up and running, we tackled a few things, and one of it was inclusionary zoning, right? Because this question comes up all the time. Why do we not have inclusionary housing here in Prince George's County? And so we worked with a consultant to do a market study. And you all know this, sort of a little bit how you set your parameters on the study. Sometimes
Actually, Councilmember, could you say in a sentence what inclusionary housing is?
Sure. So in essence, inclusionary housing would, in essence, require developers when they are building a new project to include a certain percent of those units as affordable housing at a certain AMI. So how you set that, what the percentage is, what the amount of AMI is, all of that sort of varies depending on how you set up your legislation. So the consultant actually did an evaluation of this, and the conclusion that came back was that, and Aspasia sort of spoke to this, is that the county wasn't quite ready for doing this policy in Prince George's County. And part of it is actually, and many of you may not realize this, but to a certain degree in some places, we have oftentimes had to underwrite market rate housing, which is to say that there are developers who won't go in some of the markets here in Prince George's County because our income levels are actually below not only the regional average, but are actually below the county average. I'll give you an example of that, which is I have many locations, including even at the New Carrollton Metro, where the median income in Prince George's County, it's around $85,000, $86,000. It is dramatically lower than that around the New Carrollton area. And so, you know, sometimes we even find that market rate housing, which we definitely want in some key places, we're even in a space of having to figure out how to make sure that we're moving that forward, particularly around transit. So the dynamics around market in Prince George's County historically have been a bit different. But when we ran that study a few years ago, we really wanted to make sure, this goes back to the question you guys have pushed a lot tonight, which is where do you set your AMI for these projects, right? Are you focusing on people who are at 120% AMI? Are you focusing at people who are 80% AMI? Are you focusing at 60% or 50%? So when we ran that study a few years ago, we didn't want to just do 80% AMI. We wanted to see, could we start doing inclusionary housing setting aside some of those units and thinking about it, I believe we ran the study at 60% AMI. Once again, it came back and said, you know what, Prince George's, your market's not quite ready. About a year ago, the Purple Line Corridor Coalition ran another study, which is great. And they did a few different analyses One was actually what their AMI number was. They came back and actually said, well, actually, in some of these high investment areas, like around the Purple Line, maybe down in other areas where we're seeing a lot more growth, perhaps in Largo and some other places, there may be potential, but they ran their data. And Marianne, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe you guys ran your AMI at 80% actually for that sort of consultant study. So once again, this is why you saw the last slide saying looking forward. Aspasia and I have been very, I thought I would leave council having this one in place in terms of legislation, but I do believe we will see the next council probably put inclusionary housing in place. But there are some big decisions ahead as to how that looks, and then also which marketplaces are yet ripe for it and what percentage of AMI we would want to be targeting. A lot of that has to do with the market and the dynamics in play in various places in Prince George's County. So hopefully that gets a little bit to the answer to the question. I think we're almost there, but there's been some analysis done. I think hopefully we'll see the next council lift this one. But it's not a simple policy solution. And my last comment about this policy solution, it also doesn't necessarily give you a lot of units. What it does do is make sure that new production coming online has some affordable housing, right? So it's a mixed income project. But in terms of quantity, it will not necessarily deliver a lot of quantity except over a lot of time, right? So it's an important tool, but I would just urge everyone, there actually is probably a few other tools in the toolbox. I would tell you if we get those working even more, we would probably start to deliver even more units. So inclusionary housing, inclusionary zoning, once again, a very hot topic. But the sentiment so far is we're not quite there. We might be almost on the cusp of doing it in some very targeted locations in the county.
Thank you, Councilwoman. There are two questions here. I know we have about a few more minutes left, but Alice Thompson asks, are there things that the county's municipalities should be doing to support the county's affordable housing initiatives? And then her second question is, and what about zoning? Is the county working on zoning changes to support avenues for affordable housing? I know you talked a little bit about that, Councilwoman, but like authorizing ADUs, for example. And that's
sure. I'll take the last one. Aspasia, do you want to take the first one or would you like me to?
Why don't you start and then I will supplement.
Okay, so on the second part of the question, ADUs, also something that, that pandemic has played a little havoc with my agenda.
What's an ADU?
Accessory dwelling unit, my apologies. Thank you, Cheryl, for helping me with our acronyms here. I do see in the future also accessory dwelling units being part of the zoning code. In fact, my last meeting in my office before the pandemic was actually on accessory dwelling units. It was a great meeting. We came back to it at the end of last year with the hope that maybe we could figure out a way to move it forward this year, but there was still so much in play because our new zoning ordinance, as many of you know, just really went into effect of April this year. So I look forward to working with a team of folks to get this one up and running, but it is one I'm going to have to sadly leave to the next council, but I look forward to seeing that put in place in Prince George's County. And then on the first part of the question, I'll yield to Aspasia on this one, but I would say that some of our municipalities are doing some amazing work in this space, thinking about inclusionary housing for their own municipality, thinking about how they could have financial supports for their renters, but also how they can encourage home ownership. The College Park City University Partnership runs a home ownership program where they offset the cost of down payment assessments with funding through community legacy dollars from the state. So I think there's a lot of really interesting avenues for municipalities to be more involved in this space and also collaborate more with DHCD. Aspasia, do you want to add?
Yeah, so as it relates to preservation, every time there is a right of first refusal property, if it is in a municipality, the municipality actually needs to actively also agree on us exercising our rights. So we have gone through that in Hyattsville. It has been great. So so there is that close partnership. When it comes to new production, if the municipality requires or strongly encourages a new developer as part of the approval process to deliver also affordability, we get on the table and we help with all the tools we can. So there is a lot of power at that municipal level to steer the ship one way or another and to create these partnerships. So yes, there is a lot we can do there together.
And if I could just say, there's another question that just was popped in. I think Corzan, you added a question as sort of about zoning regulations. So just to share with everyone, I think most of you probably know this, but the county today is operating under 2 different zoning regulations, our older zoning ordinance plus a brand new zoning ordinance that is now in effect, that actually has and sort of upgrades our standards and actually smooths out in many ways the opportunities for development. In my experience right now, actually in Prince George's County, is that there is quite a bit of interest in affordable housing. I mean, Aspasia might correct me, but I'll go back to the example I said. In my district, in District 3, there in the last, you know, in 20 plus years, there really has not been a new affordable housing project pipelining. And currently today, I have 2 under construction, a third one that will happen in a few years, another one that working through financing, and then a 5th one out there. So I think there is some dynamics that have shifted, and perhaps that's the new zoning code. But perhaps that also is some other reasons as well that sort of helped to deliver the product as well.
And I'm going to build a little bit on that because Councilmember Glaros and I were a few months ago in the same groundbreaking of the Gilbane projects that are Amazon supported. And we talked earlier about resources, right? And how many resources we need. We also need to leverage them and make sure that other partners who do work that supports the mission and the vision of the county come on the table. And that's how we're going to be able to deliver at the end of the day on the magnitude of the effort. And so it's not just the resources, it's really the intentionality and communicating that the county, this is what the county wants to see, this is what the constituents will support, this is what the administration wants to see, that's what the council is in favor of. So that's another way that we can actually scale up on our outcomes.
Thank you. And as we come to a close, I have probably 2 final questions before we wrap up. This one's for you, Director Aspasia. One, just as director, what is probably what do you think the county is doing right in this space? And yeah, I'll leave it open like that. What do you feel like we're doing really good in terms of making housing affordable for everybody in Prince George's County?
So I'm going to preface this by saying that I'm very new to government. This is my very first government job, which I started at the end of December of 2020. So I have been on the other side of the table way longer, having worked in places around the country, in Massachusetts, in Baltimore, in DC, and now locally in Prince George's County. And a lot of times what happens in the places I have worked on the other side of the table is that things happen and then governments react, right? And that's just a little too late. And I think the vision the county has put forward in really committing to affordable housing at the same time that it undertakes this economic development vision and efforts is something you don't see necessarily in other places. So I do want to applaud all of our elected officials for the vision and the commitment. And because everybody rushes around this economic development, which is great, right? We all want it, but then affordability becomes an afterthought. And in Prince George's County, affordability is not an afterthought, it's front and center as part of the economic development platform. And so this, I don't take this for granted, this is huge. It gives us as a department the platform we need to actually deliver on the work. And so that is really very different than what I have seen elsewhere.
Thank you for that. And then for you, Councilwoman, as you wrap up your 8 years on the county council, like you said, you've mentioned a lot of different things that you've worked on, a lot of initiatives that you spearheaded. It's kind of a two-part question for you. What is one thing you're most proud of legislatively? And then two, what is a piece of advice that you have for the next incoming cohort of council members when it relates to housing policy? And I know you said you dropped some nuggets throughout this evening.
I did drop some nuggets. I'm all about dropping nuggets. What was the first question again, Kyle?
Just a legislation that you're most proud of over the last 8 years, as you reflect over the last 8 years of serving this county in terms of housing. And then, like I said, what's a piece of advice that you'll give the next council as they come in 2023 and addressing affordable? And like I said, we already know you dropped some nuggets, but just to kind of close us out.
Yeah, I guess on legislation, I would definitely have to go with the Housing Investment Trust Fund, because I think that, as was mentioned, we've been able to already leverage that money for additional dollars in the space, and it is really making a sea change here. And I'm just glad that the council's always been supportive of it. I think we were always just in Prince George's County, locking down funds that no one else will ever have access to always brings a lot of conversation and consternation to the table. So I'm really proud of that. But honestly, I'm also probably equally as proud that we didn't just let that report sit on the shelf, and we formed a work group. And, that work group worked hard in our original legislation or resolution establishing it. I think we said we would meet 4 times a year. I think we met almost every month except for July and August, most of those years. And folks came in incredibly committed, and we moved through a lot of progress through that work. So incredibly proud of both of those. And then just sort of nuggets for my colleagues to be, one, they all know they can call me at any time. Happy to talk to them. But I always think that part of what makes you good at this job, and I say this all the time, is I learn a lot every day. Like, I don't think there's a day that doesn't go by where I'm not learning something on this job. And I think listening and pulling together pieces of information is really powerful. And listening to people who might not always be sitting at the same table, but figuring out how to move, figuring out where that intersection is of their concerns, and being able to move forward an agenda item, whether that's budget, whether that's legislation, whatever that means. I think that's pretty important. So I think listening, do your research, read a lot, is also really important. And it's okay to take your time sometimes on legislation. It would be my other advice. But with that said, there's a lot of amazing pieces of legislation, as I mentioned, that I really do hope the next council takes up. And I look forward to helping them from a distance as well.
Thank you so much. And thank you to both of our panelists for taking time out of their day to share with us a little bit more about housing in the county. I did just want to acknowledge it is Councilmember Glaros' birthday. I hope that's appropriate. Sorry, but I just want to just again say publicly happy birthday to you. And Cheryl, I will throw it to you to close us out.
Well, I will launch the poll then. So we thought we'd do another little poll here. So if people could just say a little bit what they thought about today's event. If they thought that Prince George's affordable housing efforts are greatly improved, impressive, average, not near enough. Oh, choice 5 was not supposed to be on there. And if you feel more informed about housing policies in Prince George's. And I'll just make a plug for our next event with Rise Prince George's and with Coalition for Smarter Growth on October 6th. We're going to be doing a walking tour around downtown Largo, talking to the hospital official and to the redevelopment into Carillon. I always get the pronunciation of that wrong. And look at pedestrian improvements around the Largo Metro Station, and hopefully a couple other things, and then do a little celebration afterwards with our kind of little smart growth social. So join and Delegate Jazz Lewis will be our featured speaker at that. So you'll hear more about this if you signed up for this, which I think you did. We will email out that information, and we will also, oh, Bernard's praising me for getting Carillon pronounced correctly this time. We will also share the recording from this and also the PowerPoint from it. So thank you, Kyle, for doing a great job moderating, and thank you to Councilmember Glaros and Aspasia for sharing your knowledge. And you know, we know we have a lot of people who are very knowledgeable about housing on this too, and I hope that this was a helpful forum.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you guys. Have a safe evening and stay Prince George's proud.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.